The idea of faithfulness is a tricky subject when it comes to adaptations, especially since it's so opinionated. I've thought about the question posed in the title of this video a lot while expanding my media palette, most recently with the newer live-action adaptation of Percy Jackson and the Olympians. Something I've eventually landed on is that faithfulness is more of a balancing act between accuracy and spirit. Before I continue, keep in mind going forward that everything I'm about to say is just my opinion, so it's okay if you disagree on something. Like all philosophical discussions, it helps if we define our terms. Accuracy, in this case, refers to how closely the new work follows the source material. If you're familiar with the original work, you expect certain events or details to make it into the adaptation. Spirit, on the other hand, refers to how well the adaptation captures the tone or vibe of the source. If the source has a silly or somber tone, for instance, you'd expect the adaptation to honor that. Something to keep in mind with all adaptations, however, is that you'll most likely not get a one-to-one retelling of the source. Sticking that closely is rather uncommon, as adaptations usually make changes or concessions to suit the new medium. For example, if you adapt a first-person book to a linear film or TV series, you'll almost automatically lose the internal monologue. Limitations such as the nature of the new medium and the budget the production has to work with can also affect the adaptation in some form or another. With those items in mind, let's look at some examples. Thus Spoke Kishibe Rohan is a live-action TV drama adaptation of a series of one-shots of the same name featuring the mangaka Rohan Kishibe from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 4 Diamond is Unbreakable. The series and its related films largely follow the events of the one-shots, as well as a couple of JoJo Part 4 stories featuring Rohan pretty closely, with some changes here and there to suit the format. However, it alters the tone a bit, leaning more into drama and suspense, but with more natural humor. It also manages to completely divorce itself from JoJo, for those who aren't familiar with it, presenting a more supernatural setting where Rohan is the only one gifted with a unique ability, Heaven's Door. As such, other characters who were originally stand users have an alternate explanation for their powers, such as making Tonio Trisardi a master of medicinal cooking. Despite these changes, however, I would consider TSKR a faithful adaptation because of the clear reverence and passion that everyone involved, except for the composer apparently, had for the source material, especially Issei Takahashi's incredible performance as Rohan. If that sounds interesting to you, do check it out. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have The Bad Guys, which adapts the first 3 books from the series of children's books with the same name by Aaron Bleeby. This film is not that accurate to the events of the books, save for one portion that's almost one-to-one with the second book, Mission Unpluckable, which shows you just how long the movie would really be if it stuck religiously to the source. Despite the numerous changes, however, it retains the same playful spirit as the source, creating something new and exciting out of the core premise for the big screen while pushing the possibilities of CG animation. Something else to keep in mind, and something I've come around on myself, is that while you might think a one-to-one retelling of the source material is the best route, it really isn't. Not everything that's in the source material can translate perfectly to a new medium, so you'll always lose some of the finer details in the process. For example, like I mentioned earlier, you'll almost always lose the internal monologue native to first-person books like The Last Kids on Earth, The Hunger Games, or in this case, Percy Jackson. Making no changes at all would make the adaptation feel redundant, and you might as well check out the original anyway.
Why are you even bothering with the game? Just watch the movie at that point.
I'll acknowledge that anime adaptations are usually pretty close to the original manga, but even the most faithful series like Spy Family or Dragon Ball Z Kai still make some changes here and there, creating a different enough experience overall. Besides, being one-to-one is not a prerequisite for faithfulness. As an extension of that last point, otherwise faithful adaptations may also need to recontextualize the material. Sonic the Hedgehog 3, for instance, adapts the story of Sonic Adventure 2, one of the most beloved games in the franchise. It's not one-to-one, but all of the most important characters and elements are included in a way that fits within the established lore of the film series, which leaves some room for playing around with the characters in new and clever ways. Among the changes made, it was actually wise of them to not include Amy or Rouge yet, as the story would have felt bloated otherwise after already including 3 new characters, Shadow, Gerald, and Maria. As someone who loves Sonic Adventure 2, I think that even with the differences in the plot and its execution, we still easily got one of the best video game movies ever made thanks to the passion of the cast and crew, as well as the director's reverence for Shadow's backstory. By this point, at least some of you might be wondering if there's an adaptation that's very faithful to the source in both accuracy and spirit. There certainly are, but one specific example is the movie Holes from 2003, which adapts the middle grade book of the same name. Since the original author, Louis Sacker, wrote the screenplay, it's a very accurate translation of the story and characters, though some minor differences to account for the new medium. The most noticeable change is Stanley Yelnatz's physique, as he originally lost weight throughout the book in both a literal and symbolic sense. For practical reasons, however, Stan Lee is thin throughout the film, as going through rapid weight changes for a non-chronological filming schedule would have had negative consequences on Shia LaBeouf's body at the time. The film also captures the spirit of the book very well, with the same grounded tone that isn't afraid of tackling strong subjects while adding a slight air of mysticism. Overall, a very good movie that holds up well and somehow doesn't feel redundant with the book. So where does that leave Percy Jackson? Well, it's a little complicated for me. I couldn't tell you why, but although I was aware of the series as a kid, I just never read the books. That changed when the Disney Plus series was announced, and I decided to finally take a shot and read the first book, The Lightning Thief, before the first season. I've since done the same thing with the second book, The Sea of Monsters, and will do the same with Book 3, The Titan's Curse. So far, I'm loving the books. Rick Riordan does an incredible job of hooking you quickly by hitting the ground running and carefully pacing the rest of the story. The world is immersive with clear rules, and I found the characters compelling enough that I cared about what happened to them. Book 2 is arguably weaker, but I still enjoyed my time with it and found the twist at the end genuinely shocking, enough that I was immediately curious about how Book 3 would play off of it. Overall, I'd recommend it so far. As for the Disney Plus adaptation, I'm watching it with people who have never read a single word of the books and are enjoying it on its own merits. Personally, I like the show enough to keep watching it, but mostly to see where they plan to go with it. Rick Riordan himself is involved, and I respect him trying a different spin on his own story that takes the whole series into account rather than on a book-by-book basis. I find that kind of approach fascinating. There are some things I do like about it, like making Polyphemus more intimidating, the blockbuster guy, and casting Timothy Simons as Tantalus. I'm not too familiar with him outside of his role in Rise of the TMNT, but he did a good job and seemed to have fun. However, there were still plenty of things that bothered me as a book reader. While the show does follow a lot of the major story beats from the source material, making some understandable changes along the way, I questioned some alterations. The show takes on a more serious tone, so some of the lighthearted moments and lines like, "You do that without my help," are omitted. In Book 1, there's a whole scene between Percy and a Nereid that gets abridged, so it was odd that he was told to go to Santa Monica off-screen. Although this apparently becomes more important in Book 3, no one ever says Riptide, the name of Percy's sword. A big one from Book 1 is the Lotus Hotel, something the movie actually depicted more accurately, which ends with them missing the deadline this time, yet for some reason they can still resolve the plot? What was the point of the ticking clock then? Season 2 tried to do more with the source and was more accurate in some ways, but the hippocampi are obviously too expensive to animate for too long, the Monster Donut shop isn't there, and Percy doesn't sail the Queen Anne's Revenge. I also kind of got it introducing a wider subplot with Lucas trying to use the fleece on Kronos, but I didn't like how it seemed to necessitate telegraphing the shocking twist from the end of Book 2, which made it far less impactful. Now, it was easier to watch the show at its own level for the second season, but I guess this experience highlights that it's tougher when you're more familiar with the source. The Disney Plus Percy Jackson is fine enough, but to let yourself enjoy something like that, you have to learn to view the original and the adaptation as two separate works. You can have your own opinion on the quality of the changes made, I've just shared a few, but if you spend all of your time analyzing the differences, you'll only feel miserable. It's natural that your feelings will be colored by whichever version you experience first, but try to look at something for what it is and not what it isn't. If it still didn't click with you, then that's fine. We don't have to all like the same things. And that's the video. Regardless of your feelings on any particular adaptation, I hope that this helped you think about adaptations at least a little differently. Until we meet again.